Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for your patience. Very happy to introduce Betsey Dexter Dyer, who I'm sure many of you know. She's a regular here at the center and also a member of the Historical Commission here in town. And she's going to give an update on the Boston Post cane today. Thank you.
More than just an update, we have a recipient here that we're very excited about. We don't tell recipients of the post cane they have to show up at a certain place at a certain time, but we're lucky that this man was able to come. So I'm going to first tell you about the post cane, and yes, I did this last year too. Maybe this will be our annual lecture. I will tell you briefly about the 25 or so recipients that there have been in Walpole for the post cane. Very briefly, I'm not doing justice to them by saying one or two sentences, that's for sure. I'll tell you about something that happened in 1920 concerning the post cane. I'll tell you about a few more recipients after that. I'll tell you about something that happened at Town Hall by which they got remarkably confused about how to handle the post cane. And you can have your own opinions about that. Then I'll tell you about someone who did not get the post cane. And I understand that can be controversial in some towns. Who deserves to have it, who doesn't? Well, this particular person, I think a lot of people would agree, deserved to have the post cane. It was not awarded to her. Then I'm going to tell you about Carl West, who used to come regularly to the COA. He died last year. And he was the one who said we're going to revive the post cane tradition. And so we did. And then I'll tell you about our two current holders, one of whom is here today. So it starts with the Boston Post newspaper. And Edward Grosier, the owner of it, was a great promoter for his paper. And in those days, you had to be a good promoter because it wasn't just one newspaper per town or no newspapers at all, as we currently have in many towns. There'd be like 6 or 7 or 8 newspapers, and they were very, very competitive with each other. So he regularly ran contests to get readers to read his paper, contests like who has the cutest baby, or what's the prettiest teenager who's going to be a movie star, or what's the oldest couple in town. Now, he wasn't going around actively looking for the oldest couple, but they would have to identify themselves, and they would receive a pair of rocking chairs from Mr. Grosier, plus a picture in the paper. So you can imagine that people would want to read the paper to see who had won the rocking chairs or who had the cutest baby. And he was not the only one doing this, but he came up with the idea of creating actually 700 post canes. We have ours right here. It's in a special display box, and if you want to see it any other day of the year, it's at Town Hall in their glass display case. It was made in 1909. It's black ebony wood, and it's got a gold foil engraved top to it. I think pretty thick gold foil. And there's an inscription. This one's especially for Walpole, but he had 700 of these made for all the various towns and small cities around New England, with a few exceptions. Now, one exception is Boston never got one, Providence never got one. Really big cities didn't get them, and you can imagine the logistics around that, trying to figure out really and truly who's the oldest person in Boston. You'd almost want to do it by neighborhood, right? Hyde Park, Jamaica Plain, East Boston. So they didn't bother with Boston, nor Providence, and they didn't include Connecticut and Vermont for some reason, maybe because they were outside of the radius of the readership of this newspaper. They're a little closer to New York. And this cane was to be awarded to the oldest registered voter who was male, because no females could vote in 1909. So the oldest registered male voter. And so the cane arrived, and the selectmen in each town were called upon to award the cane, figure out who deserved it, and award it. And in most towns, I think that's exactly what happened. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the first awardees, but I'm also going to do a little digression on Steve Avellino, who is a fitness instructor upstairs. Many of you know him because he runs absolutely wonderful classes. And Steve says that if you were a farmer, even if you were a farmer as a teenager or grew up on a part-time farming basis, had some jobs as a young person on a farm, then you have a particular sort of farmer's strength and farmer's carriage and farmer's posture that carries you through to the rest of your life. He calls it farmer's strength. And it just so happens that the first 3 people on this list are farmers. Now, why are not the rest of them farmers? Because Walpole became more and more industrial. And so we have people who are part-time farmers or who had big gardens out back or who did farming sorts of things, but we got more and more mill workers, fewer and fewer actual farmers. So the first one is Addison Page, 1909. He was age 90, and what he chose to have written about himself in the newspaper is that he could butcher as many as 100 hogs in one season. That's what he chose to have about himself. So that is one tough guy, 100 hogs. Then was Harry Shearer, another farmer. Then Henry Acorn, who is both a Civil War vet and also a farmer when he got back from the Civil War. And he was awarded his cane, or the cane, in 1920. And it's around 1920 that there began to be a controversy all over New England about whether to include women. Now, why? Well, because women suddenly had the right to vote, right? So now it's like the oldest voter, yes. Many women said, and this is in the newspaper, yeah, of course we'd like to have an opportunity to have the Boston Post cane now that we're voters, obvious. But I really like some of these other answers that got seeing some people that I'm happy to see. So of course, yes, award us the Post cane. But other women said some fairly sensible things about this. Some women said, no, this is a ridiculous custom invented by men for other men, and I want nothing to do with it. You stop and think about that. Maybe. And other women said, I'm not announcing my age and then walking around all over town with a black cane that tells everyone I'm the oldest person. And some other women said, I'm not carrying around an advertisement for a Boston newspaper, because that's essentially what this is. Boston Post is a newspaper. So these women, I think, were coming up with some interesting points. Be that as it may, in Walpole, the whole issue was considered to be so confusing that for the next 10 years, the Boston Post cane was not awarded at all. From 1920 to 1930, it was like they threw up their hands and said, I don't know what to do with women in the Boston Post cane. So the next awardee, at that point, I guess they thought it was all behind them. The next awardees were men. Next one was in 1930, and these men, most of them were not farmers, but they were hard workers. They worked in the trades. They worked in the mills. Some of them were recent immigrants. I'm not going to, again, do justice to who was a recent immigrant, but many of them were. And again, Steve Avellino, one of our fitness instructors, will say, if you want to live to a good old age, stay active, Steve says, and it helps enormously if you had an active life. Not a single person on this list was sitting in an office chair day after day like an executive, and since they were recent immigrants, they weren't arriving to find an office job for themselves either in many cases. So who do we have on this list starting in 1930? We have Porter Boyden, and he is a builder of many beautiful houses in Walpole. I'll give you 2 examples. The current day Thomas Funeral Home, it used to be the Keeling Tracy Funeral Home at the corner of Common and Lewis Avenue. That was built by Porter Boyden. And Porter's own house is one you might pass by on Common Street if you're coming to the senior center, and that's 119 Common Street, a very distinctive, beautiful house. But he built houses all over town. Then comes Samuel Hannaford, who was an engineer at the tannery. And where was the tannery? It was just down the street on South Street from the COA where the Bend is. There was a big tannery down there. And he worked at that. And don't think the engineer was a desk job either. He was working hard. And then comes John McDavitt, a building contractor. Then comes George Kingsbury, a tree warden. Then comes Edmund Gay, who was an iron molder at the Plimptonville Foundry. So Plimptonville, that S-curve in the middle of the road, there was a big foundry there. That's Edmund Gay. Then comes Charles Goodwin, who said in the news article, I've worked hard all my life, probably at all sorts of jobs. And I'm sure he had. But he also added that he hadn't had anything to drink or smoke all his life either. Not all of the recipients said that, so I don't think there's a common denominator there, but in the case of Charles Goodwin, that was one of his clues. Then comes an outlier, Theodore Slafter. He was a painter of nudes, which he called flesh paintings. And I don't know whether that was his phrase or whether that was a general term, but he painted naked people in an artistic manner. That's Theodore Slafter. Then comes Henry Hildebrand, who worked at Bird and Son, but just a week before he got the award, and mind you, this is the oldest person in town, he had worked at a potato harvest. Yeah, which is a lot of bending over and lifting of things. Then comes Stephen Ewell, who I know was an immigrant and also a farmhand. That's what he did as soon as he arrived. Then comes Joseph Greenwood, one of the town's first automobile mechanics or machinists. He owned an important car repair shop. Greenwood Road, which is off of Lewis Avenue and Main Street, is named after him because his car shop was right in that area. Then comes Patrick Broderick. He was a laborer at various mills, and he died in 1959. And then we get into some problems down at Town Hall. In the 1960s and the 1980s, the post cane was mislaid in a closet in Old Town Hall. And by Old Town Hall, I don't mean the school that they're in now, right? The old original Town Hall, essentially lost. Can you imagine that? I mean, lost in a closet. Then it was found by Selectman Frank Smith, about whom more later. Then they decided they should put it into a vault at Town Hall for safekeeping. So, I should have done something different with my paper. Meanwhile, while all this was happening, a woman whom everyone in town thought deserved to have the post cane was talked about in the newspapers just about every year. Her name was Effie Jonah. Her Effie stands for Euphemia, and her maiden name was McQuaig. I give you her full name so in case anyone knows Euphemia McQuaig or Effie Jonah. She grew up on a big farm. As a teenager, she milked 14 cows per day by hand. So Steve Avelina would approve of that. In her old age, after her husband died, she became a housekeeper for Winslow Warren. So I mentioned him because some people know that name. And that would be typical sometimes for a widow. There weren't so many supports, financial supports, so they might have to go and be a housekeeper or take in boarders. So she died at age 102. But every year, there was a build-up in the newspaper for her. She was so beloved, she was so wonderful, apparently, that there would be a big column about what she had done for her birthday that year, her 98th birthday, her 99th birthday, and so on, up to 102. And every year someone would go, and she deserves to have the post cane. Of course she does. The way she's described is how I would say this, that if she walked into the senior center right now, we'd all be really glad to see her. She was apparently a personality. She was doing all kinds of marvelous things. Well, she didn't get it. Okay, remember, this is stored in the selectman's vault at this particular point. Then, after Effie died, the selectmen decided they would start awarding the post cane again, and they called it an almost forgotten custom. And since I'm a close reader of the newspapers, I'm going to tell you plenty of people hadn't forgotten it. But okay, almost forgotten custom, let's start awarding it again. And they awarded it to Leroy Spear, a man. That's fine. The selectmen do a number of odd things in this. We're not done with them yet. It's an old Walpole family. I'll get a little more into Leroy Spear, but I will point out that if you know your demographics, in general, women live longer than men on average, which is why actually we chose today, when we are doing these awards, to award to the oldest man and the oldest woman. But anyway, back to Leroy Spear. Here's what happened, and this is going to sound very logical to you. As he got into his older age, he needed to move in with his daughter in Connecticut, took the cane with him. Yeah, okay. Then it got misplaced, and you could imagine how that could happen, that you would have the cane and the person would die and it would be in a closet, and some grandchild would say, what's this old thing? So it was misplaced, and actually in many towns in Massachusetts, they don't have their cane anymore for that exact reason. It simply got misplaced by the next generation who didn't understand what it was. So we hear about all of this from Frank Smith. This is the selectman who found the cane and put it in the vault, because Katie Birtwell, whom some of you know, who does oral histories today, she's done some oral histories of people's memories in Walpole, has a transcription of an interview with Frank Smith in which he tells all about what he knows about the post cane. So it's actually very useful for understanding this. And Frank Smith suddenly becomes involved because the select board, once they find the cane in the Spear House, decide to award it to the oldest living selectman, which is Frank Smith. Now, it's true that they weren't literally awarding it that particular year. It was a symbolic thing. It was the first year of symbolic awarding. They said, that's it, Leroy Spear's family lost the cane, we're taking it back. But the announcement was made at Frank Smith's retirement dinner, and he got some other awards as well. And they just said, well, you're the oldest living selectman, you get the symbolic post cane. All right, by and by, Frank Smith died. And so then after 1986, it was all women. And now I'm going to tell you what their ages were, because these women got to some pretty good old age. First, we have Grace Spear, who never married. She was a teacher. She received the cane at age 100, and she died at age 106. Yeah, she didn't literally have the cane. They weren't, at that point, they were just going, you symbolically in your mind, you have the cane, all right? Then we have co-recipients. So we must have had a very good town clerk in those years. We still do, actually. It's Liz. But a town clerk who was able to determine that both Maud Allen and Gertrude Nelson were exactly the same age 103. Both have been born on April 8th, 1894. So we had co-recipients. And this is the first year that a symbolic pin was given. More about that pin in just a little bit. But this was the first year that they literally got to have this pin that we still have lots of and that we still award. Then comes Georgie Marie Meyer, who was age 102 and died at age 104. And then finally, the last recipient until we revived the tradition was Jenny Marcioni, who died in 2001 at age 107. So that brings us pretty close to the present, and we're pretty close to announcing who this year's oldest man is and reminding you who the oldest woman is. But first I want to have everyone think about Carl West, who was quite a character. He'd come in, he'd hold court at one of those tables there. You remember that. And had plenty to say about a lot of different topics, as do other people too, by the way. So well remembered, well enjoyed here. And you might remember in summer of 2022, we had a fall at home, had to go to a nursing home. Up to then, he had been extremely active all over town. I knew him from the Walpole Historical Society. He was one of my wonderful resources for ideas about what to research or how to go about things. And you also might know, if you ever communicated with him, he was good at in-person communication, but he would also do phone calls, he would do emails, he did attachments, he could send videos, he could find things on YouTube. This is pretty good for someone in their 90s. He had that mastered, that technology, and he used it. So when I found out he was in Maples Nursing Home in Rentham, I started visiting him every week, and he always had assignments and projects for me to do. But mine were about history. Other people, I'm sure, had other projects being assigned to them. Mine just happened to be about history, so I was not the only person that was being told by him from his nursing home bed to do things. So he would insist when I visited him that I take notes. He would sometimes phone me urgently and tell me to come down to Maples to take some notes. And he was very insistent that he see me taking notes, that I not just listen. Now his bed is up on this level because it's a nursing home bed. I'm sitting down at this level in one of those visiting chairs. He couldn't see over the bed to see that I was busy writing things down. And he went, "You're not taking notes." I'm like, "Yes, Carl, I am." I show him the notes that I'm taking. So this is all different history topics that he's telling me to do. But one day he said to me, "I want you to find out why we no longer award the Boston Post cane in Walpole, and I want you to figure out how to get it restarted." All right. So over the next few weeks, we plotted and planned. We really did. With him phoning me, "Got to come down. We've got something to do here." He said, "You got to contact the town administrators." That's Jim and Patrick. He said, "Jim and Patrick will get in contact with the select board." That's how you get to the select board, through Jim and Patrick. "Then you got to have the town clerk, Liz, involved. And of course you have to have Carrie and Debbie involved." And Carrie and Debbie, by the way, themselves had plenty of phone calls from Carl because he had assignments for them as well. Okay. And Carl said to me, "You know, at the Walpole Historical Society, I have some pins and certificates that I made up in 1997. I want you to go and find them." And I did. We found a big box of pins that he had made up and certificates, and we have them here today. And I also found piles of letters from Carl to various other towns telling them they needed to do this too, back in 1997. Basically, what are we doing? We're no longer awarding the cane, but we're awarding a lapel pin and a certificate. So it's a good idea. So I brought the pins and certificates into Maples Nursing Home so Carl could see that we had done this. I told him that Carrie and Debbie and everyone was all over it. And then, very sadly, Carl declined in October of 2022, and he died at age 95. But he knew this was going to happen. He said, "When's it going to happen?" I said, "January." So he knew it was going to happen. I don't know if he would have been here, but he would have seen it televised, I think. So last year, we revived this, and many of you remember that. Our last recipient, our last oldest man in town, was John Crossan at age 101. And our last oldest woman in town is Frida Alpert, age 101, who as of 2024. And she attended in person last year. And you might recall she grew up on a 200-acre farm in Indiana. So there you go, farming. Now, I'm going to ask Carrie, our director, to come and introduce our recipient for the oldest man.
Hi, I just really want to thank Betsy for all of this incredible research. I'm so glad we have this information. It would make Carl so happy. She followed the assignment. She finished the task. He would be so happy. I'm sure he's looking down very, very pleased today. Without her research, we wouldn't know all of this about the cane, and we're so glad and lucky that in Walpole we do have it. I'm sure we'll release it from its case in a little bit. But we do have our oldest man with us today. I want to introduce you to Arthur Landforce, who's here. He turned 100 this fall. Also with him today is his daughter, Nita Christopher. And Betsey did a lot of this research, but she very kindly lets me share some of the story of his life. So Arthur served in World War II. He was honorably discharged from the Coast Guard. And during his time, his boat was torpedoed not once, but twice. And the crew of the boat showed bravery by warning away another boat that was coming to rescue them because the enemy that torpedoed them was still close by and they were in danger. After the war, Arthur became an engineer and a physicist, specializing in vacuum pumps that were used in outer space. He holds 17 patents. 17 patents. His daughter, Nita, describes him as brilliant, cheerful, optimistic, and even-tempered. She told me yesterday she has never, ever once seen him angry or upset. A few years ago, both Arthur and his late wife, Marion, came to East Walpole to live with Nita and her husband, and sadly, she passed at 90 years old. By coincidence, Arthur and his family are neighbors with Frida Alpert, one of our other recipients. Must be a very lucky part of town to live in. When Arthur retired from his job as an engineer, he started helping his wife Marion with her Nantucket Lightship Basket Enterprise. And he invented many tools. I believe, is that one of the tools there? That's a learning tool for you. Oh, okay. So he invented some tools to help with that process to make the baskets. He learned how to make the baskets himself, and he also became an expert in this with Marion. Their baskets are in the Smithsonian collection and in other museums. One of their baskets was also used to decorate the White House Christmas tree the year of the Clinton administration. And the theme that year was the 100 best craftspeople in the United States. But Betsey was very careful to point out that they are artists, not just craftspeople. For many years, he taught basket making with Marion, and they were influential to the next generation of basket makers. I'm just so glad he's here today. Nita very generously brought some artifacts from his life and some things that tie his story together so beautiful, in such a beautiful way, and we're so grateful that you're both here with us.
And while Nita unpacks some baskets, Nita want to unpack some baskets? While Nita unpacks some baskets, I want to say that I found out something surprising. I hope she doesn't mind me saying this. My next door neighbor, Mickey, who's sitting in the back row, was a student of Arthur's. And she is a professional Nantucket basket maker. And there she is. Oh, and she's holding up one of... Mickey, come up here and show it to Arthur. This is my next door neighbor. And I said, my goodness. So Mickey shows her baskets all over the world too. So that's what I mean when he influenced the next generation of basket makers. Wow.
This is a basket that I made at the Malians in Alter.
So Mickey just said this is a basket that she made under in Arthur's class. Wow. Wow.
2005?
In 2005, she had a class with him. Thank you, Mickey. If you want to say hello to Arthur. Yeah, do. Go get your picture taken with him, please. Yeah. I don't have my phone. I didn't know she was going to come. That's great. Yeah. Oh, yes. While Nita unpacks baskets for you to come up and see, Carrie's going to give Arthur this certificate made by Carl West, and this pin. Replica pin. Yes. Of the cane. Yeah. All right. So are there any questions or comments while we wait for opportunity to see this? All right. Well, thank you, and feel free to come up and see what we have here.